For 70 years, one rifle had been Britain's silent guardian. Through trenches, deserts, jungles, and ruined cities, the Lee-Enfield never betrayed the men who trusted it. Its bolt slid like silk. Its accuracy inspired fear. Its speed was so deadly that at Mons in 1914, German troops mistook British rifle fire for the roar of machine guns. But by the early 1950s, that legend was dying. The world Britain knew, of empires, red-painted maps, and colonial troops marching in step, was collapsing like a fading photograph. A new age was rising, a colder, more dangerous age. An age where enemies didn't march in columns. They appeared from the shadows, backed by superpowers with enough atomic fire to erase nations. In this new world, the Lee-Enfield was a relic. Inside Britain's military headquarters, a quiet panic had begun. The Soviet Union was flooding its allies with the AK-47, a weapon so simple and rugged that even ill-trained fighters could unleash automatic fire in terrifying bursts. The Americans had moved beyond the bolt-action era during World War II, adopting the M1 Garand, and now they were developing something even more advanced. Britain was standing still while the world sprinted forward. The question haunting British commanders was terrifyingly simple. Could Britain fight the next war with a weapon designed for the last one? This wasn't just about rifles, it was about survival. The Cold War was no longer diplomatic tension. It was proxy wars spreading across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Britain found itself fighting insurgencies in places like Malaya, Kenya, and Cyprus, battles where engagements happened in split seconds. A soldier working a bolt lost precious time. A soldier with a semi-automatic rifle lived longer. The truth was undeniable. The age of automatic fire had arrived, and Britain was unarmed. But by replacing the Lee-Enfield wasn't like replacing a piece of equipment. It was tearing out a piece of Britain's military identity. The rifle wasn't an object, it was heritage, honor, legacy. Some officers warned that abandoning it would tear morale apart. Others insisted that failing to modernize would cost lives in the next war. Both were right. The search for a new rifle began quietly, almost in secret. Behind steel doors at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield, designers studied captured weapons, analyzed battlefield reports, and looked at the future of warfare with uneasy eyes. And deep inside these workshops, a revolutionary idea began to take shape. A weapon unlike anything the world had seen. A weapon Britain believed would change the future. A rifle known as the EM2. Compact, futuristic, bullpup design, chambered in a new British intermediate round, the .280 British. When the EM2 first fired in trials, the officers watching it felt something close to awe. Britain believed it had created the rifle of the next century. The weapon was tested, improved, approved, and then something Britain didn't expect happened. The United States said no. Washington wanted NATO to use one cartridge, the 7.62 by 51mm NATO round. They warned that without a unified ammunition standard, future wars would be a logistical nightmare. The US had the influence, the leverage, the power. Britain had one choice: agree or stand alone. Reluctantly, furiously, Britain canceled the EM2. Inside the Enfield factory, engineers watched their masterpiece die. Decades later, many would still call it the greatest rifle Britain never had. With their dream shattered, British commanders faced an almost impossible reality. Find a new rifle, again, from the beginning. And this time, the clock was ticking. Because Britain was entering the Cold War with a weapon from World War I, and its rivals were arming the future. The next decision would define an entire generation of soldiers, and it would lead Britain to a rifle they never planned to adopt, yet one they would come to trust more fiercely than any before.
The death of the EM2 left Britain in an awkward, dangerous limbo. The nation had lost a revolutionary weapon, a rifle designed for the modern battlefield, and had no immediate replacement. Soldiers were still carrying the Lee-Enfield, a rifle whose glory was undeniable, but whose design belonged to a different era. Its bolt action was a marvel of engineering. Its 10-round magazine could outrun the enemy's expectations, but in a world where automatic fire was now the standard, it was tragically slow. The Cold War wasn't polite. It didn't wait for tradition. Across the Iron Curtain, weapons were changing the rules of war. The AK-47 spread like wildfire among Soviet allies and insurgent movements, teaching one brutal lesson: speed, volume, and reliability could decide life or death in an instant. The Americans, meanwhile, were pushing forward with the M14, a semi-automatic rifle that emphasized range and power, but it was heavy and difficult to control in rapid fire. NATO needed uniformity. Britain needed survival. It was in this context that the Belgian Fabrique Nationale, FN, stepped into the picture. FN had been quietly perfecting a semi-automatic rifle since the late 1940s, The FAL, short for Fusil Automatique Léger, the light automatic rifle. Designed to fire multiple cartridges, including the new NATO standard 7.62 by 51 mm, it was robust, adaptable, and capable of withstanding conditions that would break lesser rifles. Soldiers were still carrying the Lee-Enfield, a rifle whose glory was undeniable, but whose design belonged to a different era. Its bolt action was a marvel of engineering. Its 10-round magazine could outrun the enemy's expectations, but in a world where automatic fire was now the standard, it was tragically slow. The Cold War wasn't polite. It didn't wait for tradition. Across the Iron Curtain, weapons were changing the rules of war. The AK-47 spread like wildfire among Soviet allies and insurgent movements, teaching one brutal lesson. Speed, volume, and reliability could decide life or death in an instant. The Americans, meanwhile, were pushing forward with the M14, a semi-automatic rifle that emphasized range and power, but it was heavy and difficult to control in rapid fire. NATO needed uniformity. Britain needed survival. It was in this context that the Belgian Fabrique Nationale, FN, stepped into the picture. FN had been quietly perfecting a semi-automatic rifle since the late 1940s, the FAL, short for Fusil Automatique Léger. Designed to fire multiple cartridges, including the new NATO standard 7.62 by 51 mm, it was robust, adaptable, and capable of withstanding conditions that would break lesser rifles. British military officials sent teams to Liège, Belgium, to test the FAL against domestic prototypes and American designs. It was a grueling process. The rifle was submerged in mud, soaked in water, buried in sand, frozen in snow, and heated in desert ovens. Yet after every trial, it continued to function flawlessly. Soldiers who tested it whispered in disbelief. The rifle seemed almost alive. It refused to quit. But adoption was not guaranteed. British generals were cautious. The FAL was foreign. Semi-automatic rifles had a reputation for complexity. British military doctrine emphasized disciplined, aimed fire over spray and pray tactics. Could a foreign rifle really serve the British soldier? Could it honor the legacy of the Lee-Enfield, the rifle that had won wars and inspired generations? To answer these questions, engineers at Enfield began modifying the FAL. They removed the fully automatic function, an unusual step since most FAL variants included it, and focused on creating a rifle that rewarded careful marksmanship while remaining devastatingly reliable. The new rifle had to be simple to maintain, resilient in any climate, and intuitive enough that soldiers could master it quickly. The result was the L1A1 Self-Loading Rifle, soon known simply as the SLR. Its appearance was striking but familiar. Wooden furniture connected it to the traditions of the Lee-Enfield, as its gas-operated semi-automatic system brought British infantry into the modern age. Its cocking handle was placed on the left side, allowing ambidextrous operation, and could fold flat during storage. Its gas regulator had multiple settings to ensure operation in extreme conditions, from tropical jungles to Arctic cold. Every detail had been considered with a single goal: make soldiers trust this rifle with their lives. Despite these innovations, there was resistance. Older officers clung to the Lee-Enfield like a talisman. Young recruits marveled at the SLR's smooth operation, but were wary of abandoning the weapon that defined their heritage. Parliament debated. NATO monitored. Defense officials argued endlessly about weight, range, and recoil. The SLR was heavier than new American rifles. The 7.62 by 51 mm cartridge kicked harder than smaller calibers, and its 20-round magazine was modest by emerging standards. But no other weapon offered the combination of power, accuracy, and durability. The SLR fired rounds accurately up to 600 meters. Its recoil, though firm, was manageable for trained soldiers, and every component had been tested for reliability. By 1954, after months of trials, Britain made its decision. The L1A1 SLR would replace the Lee-Enfield in service. Production began in earnest at Enfield in 1955. Soon, Commonwealth nations followed suit. Australia manufactured the L1A1 at Lithgow. Canada created the C1 rifle, and other former colonies adopted or imported the SLR. A single design now armed soldiers from the tropics to the Arctic, providing a unified standard for training, maintenance, and combat. The transition wasn't just logistical, it was psychological. Soldiers trained for weeks, learning to strip, clean, and reassemble the SLR blindfolded. They memorized its balance, weight, and trigger feel. They learned how to adjust the gas regulator depending on climate and terrain. The rifle demanded respect, and it gave it in return. Meanwhile, military planners began to realize something extraordinary. The SLR didn't just replace the Lee-Enfield, it transformed infantry tactics. The semi-automatic fire allowed soldiers to maintain a higher rate of aimed shots, suppress enemy fire more effectively, and engage multiple targets without exposing themselves unnecessarily. In urban combat, in dense jungles and on open plains, British infantry now had a weapon capable of surviving the extremes of the Cold War battlefield. The SLR's legacy was only beginning. Soldiers who wielded it would soon test it under the harshest conditions imaginable, conditions that would separate the ordinary from the extraordinary, and show whether this rifle could truly live up to its promise. It was a rifle Britain didn't plan to adopt, yet a rifle Britain could never do without. The true test of a rifle is not in the lab, nor in the sterile halls of military academies. A rifle proves its worth in combat, when the air is thick with fear, when survival is measured in seconds, and every decision can be the difference between life and death. For the L1A1 SLR, these tests began almost immediately. Its first real battlefield baptism came during the Malayan Emergency, a brutal guerrilla war that stretched from 1948 to 1960. British and Commonwealth troops faced communist insurgents in some of the world's harshest terrain. The jungle was dense and unforgiving. Monsoon rains turned trails into rivers of mud. Humidity ate away at metal and rotted wooden stocks in days. Ambushes came from shadows. Death could appear without warning. Yet through it all, the SLR refused to fail. Soldiers discovered that its gas-operated semi-automatic mechanism allowed for rapid, precise fire, even when wet or caked in mud. Where a Lee-Enfield would require seconds to cycle a bolt between shots, the SLR fired again instantly, giving soldiers the edge in life-or-death firefights. Its 7.62 by 51 mm cartridge had the stopping power to punch through jungle foliage and bamboo, clearing the way for advancing patrols. Veterans would later recount stories that bordered on legend. SLRs submerged in swamp water, still fired when retrieved hours later. Rifles coated in mud, dirt, and grime continued to function flawlessly with only basic field maintenance. It was, they said, a rifle that demanded respect but repaid loyalty tenfold. The L1A1 SLR's next proving ground came in a completely different environment: urban combat in Northern Ireland, beginning in 1969. The Troubles were a nightmare of close-quarters warfare. Soldiers patrolled narrow streets, where civilians lived just behind the next door, and sniper fire could come from any window or rooftop. In these operations, precision and reliability were paramount. Every round fired could have political, legal, and personal consequences. Here, the SLR's power and accuracy became both a weapon and a responsibility. Its 7.62 round could overpenetrate walls, but its disciplined semi-automatic fire allowed trained soldiers to engage threats without unnecessary collateral damage. The rifle's ergonomics, including its ambidextrous cocking handle and balanced weight, made it surprisingly agile in the confined urban environment. Meanwhile, in Borneo and Aden, British forces faced another type of jungle warfare: dense, hot, and teeming with hazards. SLRs had to survive torrential rains, leeches, biting insects, and relentless guerrilla tactics. And yet, just as in Malaya, the rifle proved its worth. Stories circulated of patrols that fired thousands of rounds with minimal stoppages, of rifles continuing to function after accidental immersion in rivers or swamps. Across every battlefield, a pattern became clear. The SLR was more than a weapon. It was a constant companion, a tool soldiers trusted with their lives. Its simplicity meant fewer things could go wrong. Its power and accuracy gave soldiers confidence in situations that would have crippled less capable weapons, and its design allowed for rapid adaptation to nearly any climate or terrain. The SLR also forced a shift in tactics. British infantry began emphasizing aimed fire over suppressive spray, a return to the marksmanship traditions of the Lee-Enfield, but updated for the modern era. Patrols could lay down disciplined volleys of fire at multiple targets, controlling the battlefield in ways impossible with bolt-action rifles. Even younger soldiers, who had grown up with semi-automatic rifles as the norm, learned to respect the precision and discipline the SLR demanded. In every environment, from the swamps of Malaya to the tight streets of Belfast, from the jungles of Borneo to the deserts of Aden, the SLR proved one thing: it could survive anything. It was tested in extreme cold and blistering heat, soaked in rain and buried in mud, dropped from heights and handled by thousands of inexperienced recruits. And every time, it emerged reliable, precise, and ready for more. Yet the rifle was not perfect. Its weight, over 10 pounds fully loaded, could tire soldiers during long patrols. Its recoil demanded proper technique, particularly in rapid engagements. And the 20-round magazine, while sufficient, was modest compared to emerging standards. But these were minor complaints against a weapon that had already proven itself in the harshest conditions known to infantry warfare. The SLR's battlefield reputation grew steadily. Soldiers began to personify their rifles, giving them nicknames and stories. To them, the SLR was more than a tool. It was a partner in combat, a symbol of trust in a world where trust was scarce. Letters home from soldiers often mentioned their rifles, describing them as reliable friends who never faltered, who responded instantly when needed, and who could survive situations that would destroy other weapons. As the SLR spread across Commonwealth armies, its legend grew. Australian soldiers at Lithgow and Canadian troops with the C1 variants discovered the same qualities: resilience, accuracy, and brutal power. From the Arctic training grounds of Canada to the steamy jungles of Southeast Asia, soldiers across continents learned the same lesson. This rifle could be relied on under the most extreme circumstances. It was in these trials of fire and weather that the L1A1 SLR earned its fearsome reputation. Soldiers who had once feared the switch from bolt-action rifles came to embrace it. Older non-commissioned officers, trained on Lee-Enfields, learned new maintenance procedures and firing techniques. Younger soldiers, already accustomed to modern rifles, recognized the SLR's advantages in combat situations where failure meant death. By the end of the 1960s, the L1A1 SLR had moved beyond mere service rifle status. It had become a legend, not because of politics, nor because of design alone, but because it had been forged in battle. From secret jungles to city streets, it had endured conditions that would have destroyed other rifles. And in doing so, it earned the respect of soldiers, commanders, and historians alike.
By April 1982, the L1A1 SLR had already earned a reputation, forged in jungles, cities, and swamps across decades. Yet nothing could truly test a rifle's mettle like the Falklands War, a conflict that erupted suddenly, thousands of miles from Britain, in one of the harshest and most unpredictable environments imaginable. On April 2, 1982, Argentine forces invaded the Falkland Islands, catching the world off guard. Britain responded immediately, assembling a naval task force and dispatching soldiers and Marines across 8,000 miles of hostile ocean. Their landing sites were treacherous, winds exceeding 70 miles per hour, icy rain lashing across barren hills, and terrain that turned even the simplest maneuver into a deadly challenge. For the infantry, the SLR was more than a rifle, it was a lifeline. Soldiers carrying the L1A1 faced conditions that would break most weapons. Cold winds cut through every layer of clothing. Rain soaked boots and clothing, turning slopes into mudslides. Helicopters shuttled troops across inhospitable terrain, dropping them into positions where exposure was a constant threat. And through it all, the SLR never faltered. Its 7.62 by 51mm cartridge delivered both power and range, crucial in the open landscapes of the islands. Unlike smaller rifles or lighter automatic weapons, the SLR allowed soldiers to hit targets at distances the Argentine forces could not match. Paratroopers moving across exposed ridges found reassurance in the familiar weight and feel of their rifles. Every pull of the trigger was precise, every shot deadly. During engagements at Goose Green and Darwin, the SLR's reputation reached new heights. The terrain offered little cover, and soldiers had to rely on both their training and the reliability of their weapons. SLRs fired thousands of rounds in intense combat, through rain, mud, and freezing wind. Soldiers reported that the rifles maintained accuracy even when drenched, that the gas-operated mechanism functioned flawlessly, and that the semi-automatic fire allowed for rapid, controlled responses to enemy movements. One paratrooper recalled the distinctive crack of SLR fire echoing across the hills, a sound that became a symbol of survival and camaraderie. It wasn't just a rifle, it was a constant in the chaos, a tool soldiers trusted implicitly. Meanwhile, the SLR's design choices, once criticized for weight, proved advantageous. The front-heavy balance, often seen as cumbersome, actually provided stability against strong winds and uneven terrain. Soldiers carrying the rifles over hills, rivers, and rocky slopes found that the weapon's heft steadied shots, even under extreme fatigue. But the Falklands also highlighted the rifle's limitations. The 20-round magazine meant that reloads were frequent in prolonged firefights.
Its weight, over 10 pounds when fully loaded, placed enormous strain on soldiers carrying full packs across rugged terrain. The powerful recoil, while manageable for trained infantry, could reduce rapid follow-up shots in extended engagements. But these minor drawbacks were dwarfed by the rifle's reliability, power, and precision, the qualities that mattered most when lives were on the line. Veterans of the conflict described the SLR almost reverently. Some recounted rifles functioning perfectly after being dropped from cliffs or submerged in icy rivers, a testament to the rugged engineering of the L1A1. Others spoke of how the rifle's consistent performance gave soldiers confidence to move and fight under conditions that would have paralyzed less equipped units. The SLR's performance in the Falklands cemented its legacy. It was not only a tool of war, but also a symbol of trust, discipline, and British military engineering. Soldiers who trained with the Lee-Enfield could see the evolution, the blending of tradition with innovation. The rifle carried them from the legacy of empire into the modern age of warfare. Commonwealth troops also felt the impact of the SLR. Australian soldiers brought their own L1A1s from Lithgow, and the Canadian C1 variants mirrored the British design. Every soldier, from the Royal Marines to the Parachute Regiment, relied on the SLR's power and precision. Even in an unfamiliar environment, thousands of miles from home, the rifle performed exactly as intended. The Falklands War also demonstrated the strategic advantage of disciplined semi-automatic fire. Unlike fully automatic rifles, which risked wasting ammunition in revealing positions, the SLR allowed soldiers to engage targets with controlled, accurate fire. In close combat and long-range engagements alike, this precision proved decisive. After the conflict, military analysts and historians would reflect on the SLR's contribution. Its weight and recoil were balanced by unmatched reliability. Its semi-automatic system was simple enough to maintain in the harshest conditions, yet powerful enough to dominate enemy forces. In the windswept hills of the South Atlantic, the rifle's legacy was not cemented by politics, not by design alone, but by surviving the unforgiving test of combat. In essence, the Falklands proved what soldiers had already discovered in Malaya, Northern Ireland, and Borneo. The SLR could endure anything and still deliver lethal precision. It became not just a weapon, but a symbol of confidence, a testament to decades of careful engineering and battlefield experience. By the war's end, the British Army and Commonwealth troops had witnessed firsthand what made the SLR legendary. It was a rifle built for extremes, trusted under fire, and capable of defining the outcome of battles. Its story was no longer theoretical or confined to trials. It was written in the mud, rain, and blood of soldiers who depended on it with every heartbeat. And yet, despite its battlefield success, the world was changing once more. New technologies, lighter cartridges, and shifting doctrines would soon challenge the place of the SLR in British military history. But in 1982, on the windswept Falkland Islands, the L1A1 had proved itself beyond doubt. It was more than a rifle. It was a lifeline.
The story of the L1A1 SLR does not end on the battlefields of the Falklands. For decades, this rifle defined British and Commonwealth infantry. From the icy slopes of Canada to the humid jungles of Southeast Asia, from urban streets of Northern Ireland to the deserts of Aden, the L1A1 was the constant companion of soldiers who faced war in all its forms. Yet, like all weapons, the SLR eventually faced the inevitable march of progress. By the 1980s, military thinking was shifting decisively. Experiences from Vietnam had shown that most infantry engagements occurred at shorter ranges, typically under 300 meters. Lighter, more compact rifles firing smaller, controllable cartridges allowed soldiers to carry more ammunition, fire more rounds rapidly, and maneuver more easily in complex terrain. Britain began to phase in the L-85A1, a bullpup assault rifle chambered in 5.56 NATO. The new rifle was lighter, shorter, and more suited to modern infantry tactics, but it came with its own challenges. Early models suffered from reliability issues, and soldiers who had grown up with the L1A1 looked on with suspicion. The rifle they had trained with for decades, the one they trusted in mud, rain, and freezing winds, had set a standard few new designs could immediately match. Despite its official retirement from frontline service by the mid-1990s, the SLR refused to fade from history. Surplus rifles found their way into reserve units, police forces, developing nations, and even civilian hands. Wars and conflicts across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East still saw the SLR in action, decades after it was officially replaced. Its reputation for reliability, stopping power, and accuracy endured, proving that some weapons are timeless. For the soldiers who carried it, the L1A1 was more than a tool. It was a symbol of trust and tradition. It bridged the gap between the Lee-Enfield's heritage and the modern battlefield. It taught discipline, marksmanship, and the value of precision. Soldiers trained with it not just to shoot, but to survive. Its legacy is deeply etched into the culture of British and Commonwealth armies. The L1A1 SLR is a testament to the idea that engineering and doctrine can create immortality. It demonstrates that a well-designed weapon, built with care and tested under fire, can outlast wars, nations, and even generations of soldiers. From jungles to urban streets, from freezing winds to scorching deserts, the SLR proved that some tools do more than their designers intended. They define an era.